Interview coming your way, and this one is about the cost of school uniforms, and many people are asking, is it lower this year? Because as we know, some time ago the Competition Commission ratified an agreement by the Competition Tribunal and the Independent Schools Association, as well as the South African School Governing Federation, Fedsas, to end uniform supplier monopolies. Now, following several complaints by parents about the high cost of school uniforms, the Competition Commission launched an investigation into price collusion in 2017, and parents said that they weren't given a choice because many private schools especially had one uniform supplier. So has anything changed since that investigation? My next guest says the Competition Commission has been involved in helping to regulate the price of school uniforms so that they are accessible to all. And she joins me now, Mia de Jager, associate at law firm Adams & Adams. Thanks so much for coming through, Mia.
Thank you, Sakina, and thank you for inviting me to talk about school uniforms today.
So we know that, that circular was sent out to schools. There was an agreement that was struck. But we see once again at the beginning of every school year, as it were, routinely, there are discussions around the cost of school uniforms. Some of the private schools, Curo in particular, was in the spotlight. So has anything really changed?
Sakina, whether something has changed is up to the parents to notify the Competition Commission and their school specifically whether they are seeing a change or whether it is still exactly the same. The Competition Commission, together with the Department of Basic Education, took a big step in assisting parents to be able to police their schools, and they gave strict guidelines, and the public schools and the private schools all gave public pledges that they will adhere to these guidelines. So the guidelines are there, but whether they are being implemented is up to the parents to police.
Let's just jog parents' memories at this point about, some of the elements contained in those guidelines.
So the Commission made about 5 guidelines that schools and suppliers agreed to adhere to. The first is that school uniforms should try and be as generic as possible. So we are talking about your grey or black pants and the skirts, not all these exotic colours that you do find at some schools.
So I think they came to colours, they said black, blue,
yes,
then green, and red or maroon.
Grey and white
yes,
as well.
Grey and white.
Yes,
so they even spoke to the colours.
The colours, and which is a very useful guideline and will help the suppliers to be able to implement that. So the first recommendation was that school uniforms needed to be generic. They also limited exclusive items to, for example, a school crest or a badge or even a tie. And that is just one small aspect that does set you apart from another school, but is not meant to break the bank. The third recommendation related to the appointment of school uniform suppliers. And they specifically said that the schools needed to implement a transparent and a competitive bidding process to invite suppliers to bid for this contract. The schools are also meant to appoint more than one exclusive supplier, just because the more suppliers you have, the more choice the parents have, and then it would prevent abuse or parents having to be price takers. And then the final recommendation was that the agreements with the school uniform suppliers should not be evergreen agreements. So they limited the duration to about 3 to 5 years. So the agreements may not be longer than that prescribed period.
But how binding is that agreement? Yes, the circular was drafted, and as you say, the various schools, private and public, ratified it, but is it actually binding?
So, that's a very, very good question. In the form that the recommendations were formulated, unfortunately, they are just that, recommendations. However, there has been further complaints, as you correctly mentioned, against certain schools where it was found that they were not complying with these recommendations. The Competition Commission then reopened the investigation and invited the schools to come to a settlement, and those recommendations were then made an order of court against these specific schools. So recommendations have a little bit less teeth than an order of court, because if it is now found that the schools are not complying with the recommendations, it will be contempt of court. And the Competition Commission can reopen the investigation, and the administrative fine, which they previously missed out on, can be reintroduced.
Well, I think, as you said, Mia, it's up to the parents. They are the ones who now need to move this to the next level. But thank you so much for explaining to us so clearly what actually is the state of play. Mia de Jager, associate at law firm Adams & Adams, talking to us about the legality of keeping school uniforms and those exclusive supplier agreements and how long that would be recommended for. Well, that's where we have to leave this one for now.